have it, Daniel, please.
Magandang umaga. Good morning, everyone. Maraming salamat po, Melo. Welcome, everyone, to the third month of this monthly roundtable with Seidel Foundation. Maraming salamat, Seidel Foundation, for your full support. Shout out to Carol and the training team, to Care, to Miss Bess, to Sheila, etc., who made all these things possible. We chose federalism, which was our topic 2 years ago, as a seminar topic in our workshops with the media practitioners. So we thought it's about time to put it on the table. And what's going to be interesting right now is the inclusion of a discussion on RevGov. I think both are very hot topics right now. And I think with our competent resource persons, shout out to Attorney Christian, to my good friend Al, to Prof. Ramon, and everyone in the panel who's going to put a lot of expertise on it, their knowledge about federalism, and also the controversies and issues surrounding RevGov. On that note, thanks, Seidel Foundation. It's going to be interesting, whether it's going to be the fourth month, the fifth month, until the end of this year. So at this point, I'd like to welcome and say hi and thank you as well to the resident representative to the Philippines of Seidel Foundation, Gats Heineke.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Ariel. It's a pleasure for me to participate in our third online conference already at 9 o'clock in the morning. Ariel, I'm deeply impressed by your background. Is this already part of your Christmas decoration? Or?
Yeah, we usually start decorating very early on because it's a family tradition. Yes. Yeah, as soon as the bear month sets in, that's it.
That's wonderful to see. It gives us at least some hope at these days. So very short. In fact, the Seidel Foundation is a German NGO with the goal to build up democracy and good governance. We are here in the Philippines already for 41 years. And with that goal, of course, independent and well-informed journalists for us are essential, a key player for democratic and peaceful development. For today's, and that's in short, yeah, that's already the reason why we are working together with our wonderful partner, the Philippine Press Institute. Thank you very much for that. In order to support through PPI civic journalism here in the Philippines. For today's topics, I've got to admit, of course, I'm a German lawyer, so I think I know quite a little bit about federalism in Germany. I still have a lot of questions about federalism in the Philippines, if it could work here, if it will really come. But I'm here now for 4 years, and for the last 4 years, I always hear something in the background, especially from one good, very friend of mine who's participating today as well, and that's the word revolutionary government. In fact, as a lawyer, I've never heard before in any other country something like a revolutionary government, and honestly, still today, I don't understand exactly what it is. I understand it now a little bit like this, that we just don't respect the constitution, but we keep on governing. So I don't know what it means, and for that reason, I'm more than excited to join you this morning and to listen and to learn and to understand something about this mystic revolutionary government. Thank you very much. Have fun.
Magandang umaga mga kaibigan. Magsisimula na tayo sa ating talakayan. Thank you guys for your time, and we look forward to a very fruitful discussion this morning. May I just request all the other participants to please mute their microphones because it interferes with the signal on Facebook Live, and we're also recording this for posterity's sake. But let me say that we really appreciate the time and the efforts of our resource persons to be with us today. We have with us Attorney Christian S. Monzon, the former chair of the Commission on Elections, and he was a member of the 1987 Constitutional Commission. And we also have with us Professor Ramon Casiple, Executive Director of the Institute for Political and Economic Reforms, We have with us Manuel Haujan. Dr. Manuel Haujan is the president of the Cagayan de Oro Press Club, one of the prestigious press clubs in the country. We are also joined by attorney Mohammed Al-Amin Julkipli. He's currently with the United Nations. And we're also joined by attorney Michael Henry Yusinko of the Ateneo School of Government. So let's start with Professor Casiple. Mon, good morning, and do tell us your views about federalism and the call to have a revolutionary government. Mon, please.
Well, revolutionary government by the very term is unconstitutional. It's not meant to follow the usual rule of a government. To start from that, also have heard say that you need good government are actually discussed. It's not actually constitutional. So you have to differentiate between constitutional order.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Mon? Yes, Mon? It seems the internet is a bit problematic on your side. Mon? Hello? Mon? Okay. All right. So let's hear from our friend from Cagayan de Oro, all the way from Cagayan de Oro. Yes, Mr. President. Manny, Dr. Manny,
Yes, yes.
your views.
Good morning. Magandang umaga. Mayong buntag sa tanan from Cagayan de Oro para malaman din ninyo. binaba, di ba? Nakikita. Even Senado, ang Senado, why should they push for
systems here, which is why we have to look at the implications of how it will happen.
First, let me say that federalism and RevGov are two diametrically opposed ideas. Okay? So they are two diametrically opposed ideas. And what do I mean? Federalism, in all the literature, or even some of the proponents would agree with me, federalism is a democratization project. Okay? Federalism aims to disperse political and administrative authority in order to empower more people to participate in governance, right? Federalism aims to disperse political and administrative authority in order to make government more accountable, okay? federalism aims to disperse economic growth in order to make it more inclusive. So clearly, federalism is a democratization project. Whereas on the other hand, RevGov, what is the aim of RevGov? The aim of RevGov is to put political power into a single individual, to a single person, right? And let him do what he wants. Okay? Parang bibigyan mo siya ng power and just tell him, okay, do whatever you want to do. Essentially, hope for the best that whatever he does will be good for the good of the people. So that is not democracy. That is not a democratization project. So federalism and RevGov, as I said, are two diametrically opposed ideas. Senator Nene Pimentel, the late Senator Nene Pimentel, was absolutely against this idea of federalization via RevGov because it's absurd and it's ridiculous. And if you are a genuine proponent or advocate of federalism, you will be as well.
Okay. Maliwanag po. Let's hear from Attorney Christian Monsod, who was one of the framers of the 1987 Constitution. Is our Constitution still lacking, and what is needed to solve all the problems that we have today? Good morning, Attorney Monsod.
Morning. First, let me just address that question of revolutionary government. I thought that that idea was dead because the military and Secretary Lorenzana said they're against it. And no attempt at a revolutionary government will succeed without the military. Of course, it's extra constitutional. But the point is, from a practical point of view, I think President Duterte realizes that that's not a solution because he doesn't have the military with him, right? Now, for example, the president also said that he's going to ask the armed forces of the Philippines to run the customs. Do you remember that? And he was saying, oh, that's a good idea, until they interviewed Secretary Lorenzana, who said that I was not consulted. And that was the end of that idea, because that's also forbidden by the Constitution. So I think the revolutionary government idea is dead. Now, we're discussing a shift to federal system today. I thought also that the president has already said that he's withdrawing it or he's not interested in it anymore. And but if we're going to discuss it, by all means, let's discuss it. And this idea, by the way, of a revolutionary change, that has already happened. That was EDSA. That was change, peaceful change, where we proved that we can achieve political change without violence and through peaceful means. The challenge is, can we also deliver on the promise of a new social order of the Constitution, which the context of which is EDSA? Can we also deliver that through peaceful change? And that's why people now are talking about revolutionary government. I agree that in concept, these two are not consistent with each other. But of course, Russia considers itself a federal government system. That's authoritarianism. So authoritarianism can be present, whether you're talking about a unitary and or a federal system. And to me, if you take a look at the three options or proposals for charter change, namely Congress, PDP Laban, and the Constitutional Committee, it is the theme is that is really suited to Duterte, and it's the problem with the President Duterte is that he only knows how to govern through fear and force, and it's not because he's sick or old. President Duterte is dangerous with power, and so any kind of change that puts absolute power in his hands, quote unquote, constitutional authoritarianism, won't beat for the national good. Besides, this is the playbook of Marcos. Marcos used the same argument. That is his revolution from the center. That is Marcos, isn't it? And then he changed the constitution, and then we have the infamous Amendment 6 that gave him decree-making powers to rule, even if you have the trappings or the form of a democracy. So here we are again. We're repeating history. We haven't learned our lesson. The revolutionary change, let's not use the word revolutionary. That's what Cardinal Tagle told me. Use radical instead. That radical change is already in the present constitution. And we can discuss that more in detail. And my point is that the problem is not the constitution. The problem is we are not fully implementing that constitution.
Okay. So how can that be? How can we expect a government to perform its duty when the lawmakers represent not only the people, but it seems they represent different vested interests?
That's correct.
They also have families to protect.
That's a problem of our history. As a matter of fact, political dynasties are getting worse. The studies show that what 70% of the people in Congress are dynastic, right? And when you have a political dynasties, then you have the scourge of corruption, right? Then that's the buaya problem in our country, that political dynasties, and I think the record shows that, studies show, for example, that the pernicious problem of political dynasty, extensive literature exists, that the deep cause of corruption, causal link between governance and development outcomes, such as GDP, infant mortality, adult literacy. And then if you talk about the buaya problem, then we have the pernicious dynasty problem. The presence of these dynasties correlated with higher poverty, lower per capita income, lower primary education completion dates, correct? Now, if we're talking about parliamentary shift or federal or whatever, these are means. Now, let us talk about ends. What are the ends that we want to achieve? And if we don't agree as a nation on that, we will not succeed. The ends, and this is a central theme of the Constitution, is to address poverty and inequality in our country. It's been with us for centuries. And EDSA showed us the way where the rich and the poor got together in order to promise each other radical social change. Where is that? Every administration since EDSA has failed in that regard. And here we are in the Duterte administration that is beginning to fail again. And we can talk about the details of this. Even if there was high growth, that growth is declining and all that. And if you take a look at all the indices on fundamental rights, on civil justice, on criminal justice, it's also going down. So my point is, why are we putting the means to the end? At least PDP Laban version was very candid to say that changing the Constitution will only indirectly address the problem of poverty and inequality. At least they said that, if I remember correctly, and maybe Ramon Casiple can validate that for me.
Yeah.
And so the solution is not in the means, but we agree on the ends. And if you look at the ends, how do we achieve this problem where we're the laggards in our part of the world on poverty and inequality, right? The answer is in the Constitution. Social justice must be is the heart of our Constitution. It's the heart of our Constitution. And it consists of income reforms, particularly on longer term on education and health, and asset reform, as represented by four asset reform laws, right? Urban land reform and farming, ancestral domain, and fisheries. All of these asset reform programs are underperforming for lack of funds, because there are loopholes in the law, and some of them are not even implemented. Let's concentrate on that and then address finally, the problem of poverty and inequality in our country. I submit the greatest divide in our country is not territory, identity, and so on. The biggest divide is a divide between the rich and the poor. And let's address that.
Okay. Attorney Monsod, briefly, you mentioned a word which caught my attention. And the term you mentioned was dangerous. Why do you think that it is dangerous for President Duterte to have...
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you properly.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned the term dangerous. It is dangerous for Mr. Duterte to have absolute power.
Yes, yes, he's dangerous with power, as we have seen. For example, he has on the question of freedom of the press, there is the issue of prior restraint, the way he's treating the press, right? So he said, no, you can still say what you want, but at least, but the threat itself and what's happening, for example, to Rappler and ABS-CBN is the experience in our country, and that constitutes prior restraint on freedom of the press and of speech. And then you have, of course, martial law. Unfortunately, the checking powers of the Supreme Court are not being used properly, and now the president can declare martial law anytime, anywhere in this country.
Okay, so that is the basis for what you described as dangerous. Anyway, reaction from Attorney Jill Kipley. Yes, please. Your thoughts about what Attorney Monsod said a while ago.
Well, actually, this is a bit of connecting what Attorney Ucinco and what Attorney Monsod was saying, because when we talk about absolute power and what Attorney Michael said was, you know, the diametrically opposed concepts of having a revolutionary government versus federalism, that is something that's worth reflecting on, because we have to remember that when we talk about federalism, it is about diffusing power, right? So that's what I meant when I say, and this is also re-echoing of what Attorney Monsod mentions. You know, it's not enough to look at the means or talk about the means, because the ends are important. You know, what is the point of going through a revolution or whether bloodless or however else you want to characterize it, if we're not clear what the ends that we want? And that's also one important point that I also wanted to raise from the get-go. Do we have a common understanding of what this end goal is? Did we have that conversation already? And going even more basic to that, what is our understanding of federalism even? No? If the purpose of this revolution and revolutionary government is to establish a federal system, what do we mean by that anyway? If you go to the common person in the market and over at the streets, what is our understanding of this federalism or federal project? Even, you know, the experts and even those who have already studied this quarrel over what this means. And we're putting it as some sort of panacea and silver bullet that will just solve everything in an instant because we will have a revolution. But that's not a given. So that is where this whole dangerous concept comes in. And it's not really just because it's Duterte or any specific person, because the point is having an over-concentration of power in an individual or a singular institution in and of itself is already defeating the purpose of undergoing a federal project. So that's one important consideration we all have to keep in mind. And that's why we always have to remember and keep and ask ourselves whether the means or the process we want to take in order to get to federalism is valid or invalid.
Yeah, you're also exposed with the United Nations, right? And you've been to different countries. Don't you think culture will also play an important role in the move towards federalism?
Well, for sure. I mean, I used to be with the UN, particularly with UNDP. I had a stint there working as a program analyst for their peace building work, and that's why I emphasize that, you know, apart from overhauling systems, federalism is also about relationships, and this is why culture is very important. If you look at the more advanced and industrialized nations and countries that are federal in setup, you also observe that the federalism there is not just about structures or levels of government. It's also about behaviors and attitudes. Gotts is here and he can testify. No? In Germany, for example, yung tinatawag nilang federal attitude or federal culture is very strong in the individual. It's because they understand what it is and they know how important it is for the realization of their political ambitions and political life. So that's a question for us here in the Philippines. Gusto natin mag-federal, but do we have that sort of culture where we understand that it is about dispersing power, where we understand that it is about sharing power? So that's a question. Kasi for a lot of us, and based on my reading, marami sa atin still has no good grasp of what this whole idea of federalism is. Kadalasan, kino-confuse yan with parliamentary. So ang daming high-level terms, nalo-lost tayo lahat dyan sa mga technicalities na yan, and that's also a danger in itself. So behavior and culture is very important. So that's one significant aspect na kailangan pag-aralan natin, no? Pag pumunta ba tayo sa iba't ibang lugar sa Pilipinas na gusto nating maging federal units in confederated Philippines, naintindihan ba nila ano yon? Kasi ang experience natin, we have local governments and then you have your national government. Tapos hindi pa natin maintindihan ano ba ang dynamic dyan, sino ba talaga dapat ang may kapangyarihan over X and over Y. Gulo-gulo, no? We have a very deep-seated bias towards centralization in terms of our political culture. So that is one thing we still have to address, and I don't think at this point nandun na tayo sa punto ng culture and behavior na kaya na natin i-shift agad-agad. No, kaya again, talking about the means is important because the end goal might suffer. So kung hindi natin maayos yan, ang ating sariling pag-intindi, behaviors, hindi rin natin ma-achieve yung ultimate goals.
Yeah. Mon Casiple, Professor Casiple, what are your thoughts about this? Will the Filipino culture fit a federal type of government? Mon?
Well, we have historically, federalism has been proposed at one time or another, and definitely it's one possibility. And the fact that it is now a topic means that a lot of people are taking up the discussion. But the most important thing for me in discussion is that it has to serve the interest of the whole, meaning the body politic. If federalism, meaning giving power to its section of the people, means giving that power to those people, then it would be a democratic proposal. But if federalism means weakening authority and actually taking power from the people, it becomes a problem. At this time, I don't think there is a consensus generally on federalism.
Okay.
And I think it's something to be discussed still.
Yeah. Looking at the setup today, there have been suggestions like the Bicol region can be one federal unit. But looking at the people in the Bicol region, they simply represent political dynasties. So it will be a battle between dynasties wanting to control a particular region. Wouldn't this further bring down the arguments that federalism will be good for the Filipinos and for the country in general? Mon? Yes, Mon? Wait, it's the internet again. Anyway, balikan natin si Mon. Mike, Attorney Yusinko, your views about the characters in the different regions, how do you look at it?
Let me put it this way, Melo. No? When we talk about federalism, one of the pillars of federalism is the idea of different levels of government sharing power.
Okay.
Not just sharing power, no, but sharing responsibility. Now, put that in the context of Bicol, for example. So when you talk about sharing of power and sharing of responsibility, you're looking at how local leaders look at themselves as representatives of that region. Now, the problem with our local leaders, because they are mostly dynastic, right? They are not, most likely, more than likely, they will look at themselves as representing their interests in the region rather than representing the interests of their region. So, because of that kind of mindset, meron yung tinatawag na patronage relationship between the local leaders and those the powers that be at the center. So the idea of sharing responsibility and sharing power is lost in that kind of dynamic of patronage. So I guess what I'm saying is yung federal culture that mature federalist countries already have, wala pa tayo dun sa kalingkingan na yon. And we are still plagued by this patronage kind of mindset, which is parang ano yun poison pill yun sa federalism If we federalize now with that kind of patronage culture, we will just be undermining the federal system that we impose. So counterproductive, in other words.
So Mike, what you're saying is federalism or the federal setup could be a homonym of feudal setup.
I wouldn't go as that way. No? I wouldn't term it that way because, for one thing, I don't want to term it that way because I consider myself as a federalist. No, so I don't want to put a negative light on federalism. But if you put a federal structure with our patronage culture, you will likely end up with something resembling a feudal system, which is why our country now, in its current political culture, we are still not yet ready to implement or establish a genuine federal structure.
Attorney Monsod mentioned that one of the pillars of the Constitution, the centerpiece or the heart of the Constitution, 1987 Constitution, is social justice. But it appears that since the Constitution was adopted and approved by the people in a plebiscite, what happened was there are politicians who kept people poor so that come election time, the 500 peso or 1,000 peso bill would suffice to buy their votes and their support, so to speak.
So that's really the problem, Melo. You hit it right on the head. Around 75% of our population know close to nothing or nothing about the 1987 Constitution. And sadly, most of our government officials and politicians fall into that 75%. They have little to no understanding of the 1987 Constitution. So they don't have any, they have not internalized that social justice ethos that Commissioner Monsod has been talking about. And therefore, when they come into office, when they get elected, they have that social justice ethos is not in their heads, right? Because they have not internalized that. And unfortunately, even citizens, when they cast their vote, when they cast their ballot, that social justice ethos is also not in their consciousness. That's why many observers will look at our elections and classify it as transactional because voters vote based on what they get from politicians, and politicians capitalize on that by offering largesse to their voters. So Attorney Monsod is correct, no? That our 1987 Constitution has the answers. But the problem is, majority of us have not internalized those principles, those prescriptions in the 1987 Constitution that could offer those answers.
Yeah. Let me ask Attorney Monsod. Attorney Monsod, people representation is indeed expected in a democratic setup. But it appears that people in government even bastardize the party list system. you also sat at the Commission on Elections. May I have your views about this?
Well, okay, let's just take a party list. I think the problem with the party list system was that the Supreme Court interpreted it wrongly, right? The only decision that aligns itself with this is the latest decision that was penned by Justice Carpio. But if you read the provision of the Constitution, the party list system is supposed precisely to represent constructive advocacy. And what happened was that even in the Carpio decision, he finally got it right, but he left a loophole. He said that that the representative of the party list system must come from the organic source, in other words, the group advocacy. But then he said, or must have a record of advocacy. And that's why we now have Forbes Park people representing party list. That is not the concept in that's the loophole. And if you close that loophole, where they must belong to the group he represents that has a valid legislative agenda. And what is the agenda, for example, of the tricycle drivers in Mandaluyong that was approved by the Congress once? That's wrong. So it's really the interpretation of the Constitution. I'm afraid that the Supreme Court has somehow done its role in not implementing it properly. Now, but Professor Yusinko is correct. 73% of the people don't know or know very little about the Constitution. That's why, even if I came from the COMELEC, I don't think that we put a lot of emphasis on election education, correct? I don't think that's where it should be. Election education is very narrow part of it. I think that we should have civic education everywhere in the schools year round. That should be civic education, and that's how the other countries have prospered. You know, the four tigers of Asia, Japan, Taiwan, China, and Korea, are unitary systems. And you know, Indonesia overtook us, 3-4 years ago, and it's a unitary system. Malaysia is supposed to be federal, but it is more centralized than we are. So this proposal that we shift the system in order to achieve our ends, I don't think I agree with that, Professor Yusinko. We are not prepared for it now. Why force the issue? And I think in the case of the President Duterte, he misinterprets Imperial Manila and says the solution is federalism. The solution of Imperial Manila is in the local government code and in the Constitution. We have fully implemented the constitutional provision on social justice or of autonomy, correct? We haven't done it. And I think that he interprets it as the solution to what he calls Imperial Manila. Well, that's not so. And you have studies by Professor Manasan, for example. You have studies from experts like this. For example, on federalism, let me just cite the literature. There are supposed to be 9 or 10. I'm just going to use 4, right? Countries with functioning democratic systems, however imperfect, should consider reform and refinements and only solve if there are manifest errors in the Constitution rather than an overhaul, because there is no consensus in literature on the superiority of a federal to uniform of government or vice versa. So why shift? Number 2, a messed up structural overhaul is virtually irreversible and could lead to an unstable democracy or even its ruin. The CONCOM Constitution provides that the federal form can never be changed. Number 3, a precondition for a successful shift to federalism is a fully functioning political party system that we do not have. Number 4, federalism tends to serve the interest of and thus further entrenches the existing dominant groups in the regions, in our case, political dynasties, warlords, and landed as elite, who will likely find the regional powers and resources of federalism to their liking. Now, if we are going to think about the ends, and here I'm back to poverty and inequality, let's do it the right way. Let us implement the Constitution. Now, a shift. Well, you know, it's interesting that all the proposals provide authoritarian powers to the president in the transition. And that transition is about 10 years or so. Now, what happens if Duterte dies? Right? That there's a constitution suitable to him, that suits him, custom built for him, and he dies. So what happens? Assuming that he is sincere about really pursuing social justice and ending political dynasties, he has a dilemma. He needs the political dynasties to implement a new constitution at the same time that he's supposed to dismantle these political dynasties in order to pave the way to achieving our ends. Correct? Now, I don't even know, as far as I know, he's not against political dynasties. So how are we going to solve the problem during the transition if we're going to make it? Let's think about changing it after we have improved a lot of the, with resources and powers and decentralize them according to the local government code. Let's wait until the regions are strong enough to be able to do it. The example of the pandemic is very clear. The local governments don't have the capability, don't have the resources in order to implement it, correct? It's poorly implemented with ineptness on the part of the central government and with the incapacity of the regions and local government units. That should be a lesson to us, okay?
Okay, all right. Dr. Manny-Hao-Jan, your thoughts about the discussion so far? May we have your thoughts because we've heard a lot so far. Naka-focus Pangulong Duterte, yung RevGov, what happens?
Yeah, listening to the views of yung nakinig ko, parang hindi na talaga matuloy yung federal eh. At any rate, alam mo Sir Melo, when Duterte ran in 2016, yung platform niya, federalism, yung tao bumoto sa kanya. Sinabi, di ba, ang usapin natin is, if we follow the thoughts of my friends here, federalism will not be even in the table. Look, pumunta ako, si Tangkay Tawi-Tawi, alam ni Commissioner, my friend Holkiplian. Alam mo, sa Tawi-Tawi, wala silang alam doon sa federalism, much more of the present set up. Ang alam nga nila, di ba, somewhere in the other countries. Eh. What I am saying is, if we keep on talking of what is on the literatures and on some research by some people, then hindi natin mapag-usapan at hindi natin mapa-advance ang federalismo. Di ba? Ang ibig ba sabihin, yung Constitutional Committee nga nag-aral ng federal ay ano, yung thinking nila, delay, advance, o fake news ba yun? Ang usapin is, yung RevGov nabuhay ulit dahil because of the frustration of the present structure. I agree that the greatest divide of this country is the poor and the rich. But tanong ko, if we continue having the present setup, that divide which mentioned by the great Honorable Sir Christian Monson will also be there. Is there a promise that if federal will come, that great divide will be even more, you know, be larger or what, more problematic? Ako, from Mindanao, I'd rather take the risk of having a federal, even if it in its infancy, rather than still suffer with the same present setup.
You know, magandang pag-usapan yan, Dr. Manny-Hao-Jan. Years ago, while hosting events like this, we asked a budget secretary, may she rest in peace. The name of the budget secretary was Emilia Bongkodin, a good lady. I asked her, why is it that you have forgotten Mindanao? What do you mean, Melo? The releases for Mindanao. Mukhang nakalimutan kaya naghihimagsik ang mga taga Mindanao. Sabi niya, Melo, dala ko yung record. Gaano nakalaki ang perang aming inilabas para sa Mindanao? Saan napunta? Yun ang tanong. COA dapat ang sumagot. So, maaaring may resources. Kaya lang, kung masyadong mali yung interpretasyon ng
Sir Melo.
No?
Sir Melo,
yes.
Ito lang. Yung sinasabi ninyo na malaki ang budget, sinong nag-arrange ng budget? Manila. At the present of the corruption in the past and the present. Who gets the bigger pie? It's the Manila. Then, ginawa lang nga tuto ang taga Mindanao. Look, what Mindanao gets are bombs. You know, pag nagka-problema, you expect bombings either in Sulu, Central Mindanao, and Davao, or some parts of Zamboanga. Bakit? You know, as a journalist, I keep on traversing. Pumunta ako dito. You are talking of the budget. Even let's talk the case of Chairman Nor. Alam ni Chairman Nor, that's why hanggang ngayon hindi siya ma-prosecute. Dahil malaking budget na lagay sa kanya. Pero saan napunta yung budget? It's not, if you ask si Chairman Nor, not all the money went to him. Somehow, somewhere. So, it becomes against an issue of corruption. But whether it's federal or the present setup, corruption, according to Cardinal Sin, is now a way of life among politicians. The political patronage is there. Diba? Yung tuwid na daan, natalo sa 500. So, what I am saying, these are dynamics or cultural divide also is also another issue. But ang usapin, kung tataya ba tayo sa federal, may mangyayari ba sa ating bansa?
Okay, yan ang tanong.
Yan ang tanong ko.
Okay. Professor Casiple, your thoughts please. I hope malakas-lakas na yung iyong internet. Yeah. Yes, please.
Mahalata sa mga nagsasalita lahat, puro lahat bumabalik sa usapin ng tao. It's the people who will have to decide at the end kung federal ba or matuloy ang present system. Sa akin, malaki ang usapin pa rito ay discussion. Federalism is not a system na familiar na ang mga tao. Although, siyempre, may mga partisans dyan. But one necessity is that we should have a discussion from all sides. Meaning, hindi dapat ito gawing partisan politics na frame. Kaya nga, constitutional reform yung framing nito nung unang lumitaw. At kami ay naging bahagi niyan precisely because it's a change of a system. At ang mga arguments mo rito ay siyempre, ano ba yung best under the situation? Ako sa tingin ko, ang federalism, for that matter, constitutional reform, is still something that has to be discussed on a long-term basis. Meaning, hindi lang itong isang usapan, hindi lang itong ilang tao nag-uusap, you have to bring the topic to the whole people or to the majority na kaya mong abutin. Kaya nga mahaba usually ang panahon Pinag-uusapan mo palagi pag constitutional reform, the whole term of a president. Hindi lang simpleng isang eleksyon o isang taon. Ako, ang tingin ko dyan, dapat tayo magbukas. Kasi marami tayong problema ay related sa usapin ng system. At pag ganyan ang approach natin na mag-aaway kagad, walang mangyari. Ako, I would open sa mga nagpo-propose ng federalism. Doon din siya nagpo-propose na huwag na tumuloy doon. Ang importante ay magbukas tayo sa isa't isa.
May nakikita ka bang similarity itong RevGov doon sa pirma nung panahon ni Ramos? May ganun ba?
No.
Well, meron in the sense na gustong ipilit yung paraan ng pagbabago ng konstitusyon ay napilitan. Meaning, ako may duda ako dun sa ganung klaseng approach. I think we need to have a generally acceptable process. And nasa konstitusyon na yan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, mabuti binanggit mo yan. Attorney Monsod, noon nagkaroon din po ng moves na patagalin ang panunungkulan ng Pangulo. Is the 6-year term too short or too long? Because it's in the Constitution that a 6-year term with no re-election would be good enough. But looking at what's going on, how do you look at it?
Well, you know, we discussed that thoroughly during the Constitutional Commission.
Yeah.
And if you have 2 4-year terms, I mean, this is what it showed. No? The president uses the first 4 years in order to be re-elected for the next 4.
Yes.
And so, really, the 6 years was a compromise to us. 6 years without re-election. Before we wrote that constitution, we had a nationwide series of forum, and we listened to the people. The people wanted something familiar to them, right? They wanted, for example, to vote for president, and they said kailangan yung dyan na tayo sa unitary, kasi kailangan din siguro na central government have powers when it involves social justice issues like asset reform, right? I mean, if you say asset reform will now be the responsibility of the regions, we have a problem. If we say that it must be from center, and also the budgetary requirements. The people also wanted a system of checks and balances. In other words, constitutionalism in the real sense of the word.
Yeah.
I think people who say, well, I'm willing to take a risk on federalism, they forget that when you do a structural change, then it is irreversible, right? And I think the wording of the Constitutional Committee was that it can never be changed. There is something in a provision to that extent. If you do things improving even by step, for example, the local government code on devolution of powers and resources, it can be corrected if necessary. And I think when you say take a risk on this, then my challenge to those people is, why don't you press for the full implementation of the present constitution first before you say change it?
Okay, so that is the issue. All right. Attorney Jill Kipley, your thoughts, please.
Well, we do have a lot to study first when it comes to maximizing our experience with decentralization, devolution, and even autonomy. And this is also very important because, again, in the universe of federalism and federal setups, it's not, it's easy for us to gravitate towards the archetype federal setup like United States or Germany, where you have clear-cut segmentations of central, federal government, and state governments. But that's not always the case, because in the literature, when you talk about federalism, it actually explores the full range. When you have your decentralized systems, you have autonomous and semi-autonomous units governed under a whole, which is something that we already have. So I just want to pick up on that we do have our experience with decentralization, devolution, and autonomy, except that, of course, and I think all of us agree that up to this point, it still leaves so much to be desired in terms of how it is implemented and whether it has achieved its goals. So that is still one step that we're missing. And Attorney Monsod is right. We haven't maximized the potential of that yet. It is already provided in our current system. We do have a current sort, if I can say the word, experiment ongoing now in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, where we have an attempt to widen and broaden the concept of a regional autonomous setup that moves and expands from the former ARMM to the current Bangsamoro Autonomous Region setup. So that is something that we should also take into account, no, dito sa usapin tungkol sa move towards federalism, because that is already sort of an experiment or a prototype that we can look into, and whether or not and how it unfolds is very significant and very important for all of us that want to think about broadening, moving or shifting towards federalism. So yung una, again, just to repeat, no, yung paano ba natin aayusin or babalangkasin yung local government setup natin and yung autonomy setup na yan, which are already existing, and how it will relate or how that experience should be used as we move along. So, and which brings me to my second point, no, kaya itong RevGov is very controversial vis-a-vis any conversations on federalism kasi masyadong biglaan, and experience tells us na if there's something as abrupt as a RevGov that, you know, and nagamit yung word na to, no, pinipilit or being forced, then that creates a lot of issues. Why can't we consider a more gradual, progressive, evolutionary shift? No? Why is it that in the table? So yun ang isa ko ding tanong, and for Dean Manny also, no, kasi there are those, especially the proponents, will say na it's time to jump, but is that necessarily the only way to do it? Because we can consider more slow and more paced manner of doing things, so that again I go back to my earlier point, no, hindi enough na pag-usapan natin yung means. Again, it's the end that's more important.
Okay, so what you're trying to say is kami ni Dr. Manny nasa media, and we all started as police reporters. So para ba sinasabi mo na ginagahasa yung sistema sa RevGov? Walang diretso ganun.
Hindi, I wouldn't use that word, no, pero I mean naggamit pinipilit siguro, that's one of the terms, no? And minsan kapag may ganyang elemento, we lose sight of a lot of other important things. So kaya yung proseso is very important. And again, magandang pag-aralan nga how it happened in other jurisdictions, kasi importanteng pag-aralan yan. Paano ba sila nag-evolve doon sa kinalalagyan nila ngayon?
Hindi ako nagkakamali, alam mo, dapat may kasama rin tayong ambassador dito sa discussion. I'm talking of an ambassador from an ASEAN country. Ito Malaysia, dahil sa they have a federal system in Malaysia. So, pwedeng malaman, yung bang kultura ng Asyano po pwede sa federal system. Kaya lang, babalik tayo, ito bang mga taong to, tulad ng sinasabi ni Dr. Haujan, pagtitiwalaan mo na magkapoder sa isang rehiyon. Dahil sa, I don't know whether it is coincidental, pero I hope you will agree with me that it is in areas where people are poor, where political dynasties lord over the people, are the places you can find insurgency and separatist movements. Your thoughts about this?
Well, for sure, no, kasi itong mga nabanggit mo na characteristics are present in almost everywhere when we talk about our grassroots, no, and peripheries. So pagdating doon sa areas na malayo sa sentro, talagang pernicious and prevalent ang hindi lang kahirapan, but as you said, even conflict, violence, etc. So and up to this point, hindi pa rin yan natatakel, no? Ano ba ang kasi parang ang nangyari, baka mag chicken and egg tayo pag pinag-usapan na natin yung federalism, kasi federalism is all about empowering the peripheries and the grassroots. And katulad din nung nabanggit earlier, no, it might just feed into that, kasi yung konsepto nga ng ating very parochial and highly personal and patronage-ridden politics sa peripheries is still very much alive and very much present. So yun siguro kailangan natin munang pag-usapan paano tibagin yun before moving towards systems and structures like federal setup.
Okay. Attorney Mike, your thoughts about this, because this is very timely. Why will I mention this? We have decentralized, we have devolved the Department of Health, the Department of Agriculture, and of course, whether we like it or not, the local government units have the power to accept people recommended to be provincial, city, or chiefs of police. No? So, yun. Pero at this point in time, hindi ba dapat bawiin ng gobyerno nasyonal yung health services na na-devolve sa local government units? Because not all local government officials have the will and have the idea on how to manage a pandemic like COVID-19.
Let me, that's a very good question, first and foremost. But let me put it this way, no? Let's just focus on public health as a deliverable, as a government deliverable. Let's not talk about first yung whether decentralization or centralization, ano yung dynamics, no? Let's just focus on public health as a government deliverable. Literature will tell you that it's really the national government who should be responsible for this government deliverable. So even in federal countries, for example, Canada, they will concede that public health should be a national government responsibility. And because for logic, no, for logical reasons, no, that because you're talking about the health of citizens, you're talking about the health of communities, you cannot just rely or put that burden on local governments, on small governments, because it does not make sense in terms of resources, in terms of capability, and so forth. So as far as public health is concerned, I think there's already a consensus that this should be a national government responsibility because they have the resources, because they have the capability, and we're talking about the health of the nation. We're not talking about the health of small communities and so forth. So to answer your question, yes, we should, our Congress should now reconsider taking that public responsibility off the hands of local governments and put it squarely in the responsibility as a responsibility of the national government. Having said that, I should also say that even though it's a national government responsibility, there should also be a element of delegation. So hindi lahat ng authority and decision making is in Malacanang, no? In Manila. Okay? While it is a national government responsibility, some of the decision making should also be delegated to the regions. So kailangan merong mechanics that also accommodate some degree of delegation to the local governments, particularly at a regional level.
All right. Thank you very much. Attorney Monsod, you mentioned that we have the Constitution. All we have to do is implement the Constitution. We have the local government code. Ang pinag-aawayan dito, yung ERA. Dapat merong internal revenue allotment. Pero mukhang yung ERA, nako-convert into rolling stocks like SUVs. At the behest of the provincial board, magpapasa ng resolution, kailangan ng sasakyan, pero hindi na-address yung basic needs ng locality. Would there be some remedies to such situations?
Well, first of all, we already have a Supreme Court decision that says includes all kinds of taxes and revenues that should be part of the IRA. And I think people are doing a lot of calculations on what the implications are with respect to the budget and the way the budget is written. But there is also, you know, I don't know if people have read the Philippine Development Plan 2000, up to 17 to 2022. Parenthetically, federalism is not mentioned at all in the Philippine Development Plan, nor in Ambition 2040, which was launched by President Duterte in October 2016 to achieve some 300 targets. EDA and the Department of Finance are correct. Federalism is a risky, intricate political experiment that is vulnerable to unintended consequences. So what does the NEDA suggest? What NEDA suggests to address the issue of Imperial Manila is what they call National Spatial Strategy, or NSS. The NSS aims to decongest the NCR and direct growth in key sectors throughout the country. Quote, to redress spatial and socio-economic inequalities by linking lagging regions with leading ones rather than a uniform dispersal of development which can create diseconomies and inefficiencies. And that is not subject to political boundaries. I think we should take a look at this as an economic program for the future, because the NSS is supposed to form a network of settlements even across political boundaries to maximize the benefits of what economists describe as the economics of agglomeration. What does the Philippine Human Development Report say? We are a failure in human development in our country, or the laggards at least. Human development is about the welfare of people and not the development of places. The nature of economic development is uneven. It is not about bringing jobs to people, but about closing the distance between the people in the jobs by giving people the capability and mobility to choose where to go. Now, Professor Yusinko is correct that public health must be central, just like education and asset reform programs, so that there's a uniform implementation of social justice. And we have a big problem on public health.
Yeah. Attorney Monsot, let me ask you this. There's also this perception that when parties cannot settle a dispute amicably and the fiscal fails to fix the case, then chances are the judge will have no option but to business the case. How is the justice system?
Well, if you look at the indices, world indices of our justice system, let's talk about the World Governance Index of the World Bank, where our target is from 42.3 upward, but instead we have regressed from 42.3 as a reference point to 34.1. Let's talk about fundamental rights according to World Justice Project. Fundamental rights. Our baseline is 2655. Our ambition is 29 percentile. Where are we now? 16.67. Let's talk about World Justice Report on Civil Rights, where our baseline is 23.01. And now we are 21.03. Let's talk about criminal justice system. Baseline, 25.66, and we have regressed to 10.43 index. That's how bad we are in dispensing in the administration of justice. And we certainly must change that. But that change the structure. That's so several steps away from improving the administration of justice in our country today.
Yeah, a few days ago, we had a forum with the PCOO, and our guest was the Executive Secretary of the Anti-Money Laundering Council, and they're focused on terrorism funding in the Philippines. I said, will you not also look into the bank accounts of people perceived to be corrupt? Because there may be something that we can see. So what about the level of corruption in the Philippines over the past years? What do you have to say about this?
No question, it's gone down. By the way, I think we're all familiar with the new implementing rules of the Office of the Ombudsman. That the sharing or access to statement and assets and abilities of government officials, except persons themselves or authorized by them, or if it's in the event or in the case of investigation by government people. Where is the transparency there? I mean, the government people are government are sometimes often used by itself to address problems with political opposition, and yet they can have access to it, but nobody else has, except the people themselves and their authorized representatives. I think that was just issued this week.
Yes,
by the Ombudsman.
Yeah. Are you planning to bring the matter to the Supreme Court?
Yes, I think that will end up being brought up to the Supreme Court because that seems to be such an arbitrary way of deferring to people in office.
Okay. What about the anti-terror law? Don't you think this was...
They're one of the petitioners there. We're one of the 30 petitioners. And I think the oral arguments or whether it's that or memoranda still has to be released by the Supreme Court. But we are one of the petitioners in the Supreme Court there.
Okay, so we'll have to watch this. Attorney Mike, may I have your thoughts? What do you foresee in the coming days, coming months? Coming from the better side of Katipunan Avenue?
Thank
when
you,
the
Melo.
grass is always green.
To be honest with you, to be frank with you, it's very difficult to project to project any scenario for the next couple of months now because of the pandemic. So the situation is volatile. Our numbers are still rising. The world is still grappling with this pandemic. So there's economic uncertainty. So there's a lot of variables involved that it would be irresponsible of me to make some kind of certain projection. But definitely what I want to happen is for more, echoing what Mon said earlier, there should be more dialogue, there should be more discussion in the public space. Ironically, because of the pandemic, we have now there's more access now to discuss and dialogue because of technology. So I hope there's more of that in the future, but not just dialogue, but civil dialogue. Something that that's opposite of what we see in social media now, where it's toxic, it's bangayan, it's insultuhan. I hope that we as a community set that aside and let's really accept that for social media, because we are social media creatures now, for social media to benefit our democracy, our society, our community, we have to be more forgiving. We have to be more understanding in that public space, in that digital space. Okay, let's not be quick to judge. Let's not be quick to insult others. So I hope that this pandemic, this lockdown, this quarantine that has forced every one of us inside our homes and in front of our computers, I hope this is an opportunity for us to really internalize the 1987 Constitution, particularly on free speech, on social justice, on due process, on the role of the ombudsman, on transparency and all that. Let's use this to internalize, use this time to internalize, but at the same time, use this opportunity for us to have a civil and, collegial discussion about these matters.
Okay. You looking forward to a Merry Christmas?
Yes, of course. Sino bang hindi? Alam mo naman tayong mga Pinoy. Whatever happens, Christmas will be very happy.
Yeah. May isang nagsabi na anumang political activity ang gagawin mo, dapat hindi ilalampas ng November 30. Because whatever it is, malilimutan ng tao yan pag December 1.
Exactly right. Pag December 1, wala nang politika, puro Pasko at pamilya na lang.
Pero with COVID-19, marami raw mga politiko makakapagtago dahilan sa nag-iingat sa mikrobyo.
Nagtatago sa mga inaanak.
Yeah. Thank you, Attorney. Okay.
Thank you, Melo.
Professor Mon, Kasiple, your thoughts? What do you see in the near future?
Well, we still have the pandemic. Political issue yan, hindi lang health. One, the election is coming. Nag-iisip na ang mga politiko kung tatakbo, sino tatakbo, sino suportahan. Secondly, may impact ang pandemic sa takbo din ng politika sa Pilipinas. Issue nga siya eh. Kahit itong usapin ng constitutional change, itong revolutionary government, nakakabit dito eh, ang mga usapin ng pandemic. Kaya napakahalaga na dapat tayong bantayan, ano? Kasi pagpasok ng sunod na taon, I think we are already entering the election season. Kaya mahalagang mag-isip ka na ngayon kung anong gagawin mo next year.
Pero may nakikita ka na ba mga taong magtatanghal ng kanilang sarili na makapagbibigay ng solusyon sa mga problema ng bansa? Meron na ba tayong knight in shining armor?
Well, unfortunately, no. Nung hindi pa masyadong halata na malala yung epidemic, maraming mga kwento-kwento dyan ng mga nagbabalak, ano? As of now, wala na. Tahimik. I think one of the reason is marami kasing apektado ng mga events din, gaya nung US election. Walang gusto magsalita dito ng mga politiko. Hindi pa nila alam kung ano yung kalalabasan ng eleksyon na yan. In fact, that's one of the aspects of the present situation. We really have to monitor not only Philippine situation, but we should include the US and also the regional Asian situation. After ng period na to next year, bago na yung sitwasyon sa tingin ko sa Pilipinas.
Mm-hmm. But you will agree with me, whoever wins sa election sa Amerika, they will still pursue the American interest in the region.
Oh, definitely. That's a given. That's a given.
Doesn't matter, no? Okay. Thank you, Mon. Please stay healthy. We'll have more events in the near future. Salamat, Mon. Thank you. Yeah. Dr. Manny Haldian, Manny, your thoughts about the near future, please?
Well, mga Pilipino, kahit may pandemic, mag-enjoy talaga ng Pasko yon. Except lang na medyo malungkot lang ang mga politiko dahil affected din sila. Except those nagnakaw sa SAP. Yun lang ang nakikita ko. It's not a really bleak December. It's still marami pa rin, masaya pa rin ang ating Pasko. Ang iba nga, maaga ng Pasko kasi beer na ngayon eh. Pero I hope and pray that a vaccine will be readily available. If we have to buy the story of our president na nandoon na, baka makakuha. Pero just the same, I still hope that ang mga Pilipino, alam mo, Sir Melo, dito sa pag-ikot ko I've already nag-ikot na ko sa bansa during pandemic. It's only Manila or NCR ang medyo worrisome about the COVID. Pero in some areas, okay pa lang sila, enjoy naman sila. In short, it will not be a good Christmas in Manila. So I would suggest, Sir Melo, you come to Mindanao and enjoy the Christmas break.
Enjoy the 14 days quarantine. Ibig mo sabihin.
Nagbago na policy.
Okay, Attorney Jill Kipling, please. From your end. Yes, please.
Yeah. I think ko lang, i-echo ko lang din naman lahat na nang nabanggit. No? The pandemic will still be the major and foremost consideration for most of us. It doesn't seem like it's going to let up as a point of preoccupation for many of us. regardless of whether nasa NCR or nasa ibang lugar sa Pilipinas. Kasi the reality is, yan ang laman ng ating balita day in, day out. Pagbukas mo ng social media, it's the news flash about how many cases, how many deaths, etc. So yan pa rin ang magiging pangunahing usapin. But I guess ang gusto ko na lang siguro maidagdag, apart from yung sinabi ni Attorney Mike no, na more civil and open conversations about this issue, working to continue the dialogue, I think ang isa kasing na-observe ko ngayon, nagiging mas keen na yung eyes ng tao sa evidence. So I think that's one of the things na ako kung pag-uusapan natin yung hopes and aspirations no, when talking about this issue of federalism, constitutional change, dapat i-nurture natin yung ganong behavior na look at the evidence. It's important to take a look at the figures kasi minsan madadrown tayo sa rhetoric, hindi na natin nakikita kung grounded pa ba yan sa realidad as extrapolated in studies, in researches. So, no, talking about the vaccine, Manny, no, yan ang kasi mahirap na nakita na natin over the past few years nung sumabog ang fake news. Talagang we saw how pernicious and evil that was, and I hope and pray na coming towards the return to hindi a new normal, the better normal, sana yung evidence-based na behavior ma-retain natin in terms of conversations when we do our own reflections on matters of public interest. Kasama na yung federalism.
Yeah, thank you. Attorney Christian Monsod, your thoughts, please. What will be your message? How do you look into the near future?
I think the traditional media and social media have a big role to play in what happens. I think it was Ateneo who said that in Facebook, there are 19,000 posts, 1.4 million comments, and 75 million accounts. It's very interesting in this regard. Number two, there is a changing paradigm of people power. Don't think about bringing down the president anymore the way it was done before. The poor will only take to the streets, will not take to the streets anymore. They want to exercise people power in their own communities to improve their lives. So trying to bring anybody down with people power is not a good idea. There are hopeful stirrings in the local level in the last elections. There is a long list of dynastic names that lost in the last elections, and some very good young people, even if some of them are replaced by other dynasties, or whether the reason is contestability rather than dynasty. But this is good. And it means that there is no risk to unintended consequences, like a big bang theory on charter change. Our country has a history of not being kind to our poor, and we owe it to them. On our longer term vision should be a new generation of leaders who come from the poor. What is my answer to this media and social media is this. Maybe we can persuade the president to look again at the NEDA solution and the amendments to the local government code and look at the example of Bangsamoro, although it is less than perfect law, and concentrate on pro-poor laws and programs from here on, because he will have to step down in 2022 unless he engages in extra constitutional means. But what about the accountability issue? Because I think the president is also worried about his accountability after he steps down. And my answer to that is this: if he does the right things in the next 2 years, then the people, especially the poor, will be the first to protect him on his accountability. Will it work? I don't know. I think it might work. I believe that there's a statesman in every politician, and it's up to us to find it in every way we can. As long as there's a window of opportunity, however small, it is worth the effort to try. Democracy is about dialogue and compromise. There is very little space in the room for extremists or purists, but we all have a right to be heard. Real change can only come if we have both a transformational leader and a transformational people. That means us. Are we willing to ourselves change in the same way that we are asking our leaders to change, even if it is against our own self-interest? And that I'm addressing also particularly to business there is a price to pay for every worthy cause. I think, let me just say that if the president does not want to talk or insist on taking the charter change route, we have a fight in our hands for our rights and our freedoms. Then we have an even greater role in that fight, but we can prevail. I think, if you remember, we have fought 5 of the last 6 presidents on matters of principle and won all of them. Marcos on dictatorship, Ramos on Pirma, Estrada on Concord, Arroyo on Sigaw ng Bayan, and Aquino on Hacienda Luisita. As a Pulitzer Prize awardee Alice Walker reminds us, the most common way that people lose their power is when they think they don't have any. Thank you.
Okay. Maganda po. Thank you very much. I'd like to say thank you to all our resource persons. Napakaganda, napakalalim ng talakayan. Wala na ako idadagdag except a sentence from a person named Nelson Mandela. Ang sabi niya, it is in your hands to create a better world for all who live in it. With that, we bring to a close another roundtable with PPI. Thank you to all our guests, to all our colleagues in the media, at dun sa mga nanood on Facebook Live. Please stay safe, please stay healthy, and keep clean. Salamat po. Magandang araw hanggang sa susunod na edisyon ng ating Roundtable with PPI. God bless us all. Thank you.